Alrighty. Get the pre-show rocking and rolling.
Doing the pre-show.
Talking about stuff. Pre-show stuff.
That's funny. On the pre-show, doing pre-show things.
Doing pre-show stuff. That's right, folks. Bum, 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 bum. I probably should crank up the music a little bit. Get that beat going. Apparently.
Everything coming in all right?
Yeah, everything's going good. I am not I'm trying to get it my little social plug-in to connect to Facebook, and it's not pulling up the current show for some reason. But we're streaming, so that's the important thing. That is the important thing. I have learned not to get stressed about this stuff, because there's always something.
That's very zen. Zen in the art of VMix. That can be how you roll moving forward.
Yeah.
Is it always Facebook that's problematic? Like you coming in and YouTube is just always run smoothly?
No, I have. So if I want to do like the social little guy down in the bottom thirds, that little guy, I have to connect the software that I'm running the show into the social media. And so I'm able to connect to Facebook, but I have to find the actual post that it's supposed to pull comments in from. And the current post is not showing up in the system. So if the current post doesn't show up in the software, then I can't pull any comments that people leave on Facebook into the show. So
fair enough.
It is what it is. It's pulling in YouTube without a problem, but
it's very meta of you to not have anxiety about producing the show about anxiety.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, the show does not depend on bringing in those comments. If it did, I may feel a little differently. So I've had plenty of anxious moments, that's for sure, especially when it comes to doing live shows like this with people. I was doing one with Steve, and it was like the guests didn't show up until like 2 minutes before we were supposed to go live. There was like no tech check or anything, and it's like, well, we're just gonna roll with it, see what happens.
Wow.
Not much that can be done, unfortunately, folks. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum.
Gotta do the tech check. Makes sense.
Always. Always. You guys gonna get a little heat wave down there today? We're supposed to get in the low 90s.
It looks like it. I don't know.
You might actually hit 70.
And sunny. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like heat wave. I don't know. He had 75.
I guess it all depends on the fog, if the fog rolls out or not.
Yeah. I don't know if we will have any fog, but we are certainly having the sun right now.
All right.
And it's hot there already?
No. I think it was like 60 something when I went for a walk, it says it was in the 50s. We're up to 72 already, so that's not bad. It's a good sign.
Sure. Yeah.
Get out for my walk at lunch, see a little bit of heat. Alrighty, folks. Welcome to the show. This is the No Fucks Given podcast, living your authentic life. One of these days, I'm going to actually have a show producer, who will do that for me. So they'll be responsible for the timing. You guys already heard it. That's Will. I'm Ryan. And welcome to the show. We are all about living your authentic life. So we talk about different topics around health, mental awareness, mental health, I should say more specifically. Just try and create more awareness, because it seems like, I don't know if you feel this way, Will, but there's a lot of just not knowing that we have the ability, the capabilities to live the life that we want.
That's very true. And you cannot fix what you don't know might be broken or could be different or better. So,
nice.
Yeah. And when it comes to mental health, what I would say is there's a huge gap in the ability of people to attain the care that I personally believe everyone can benefit from. It's not that it's like everyone, it's almost a pejorative, like, man, you need to go to therapy, like there's something wrong with you. But it's like every human needs to go to therapy just because it'd be good for you, if nothing else. And living authentically and the way your mind intersects with that is also really important for your health and your enjoyment, and for the rest of us too, on some level. As it gets better and more authentic for you, it gets better and more authentic for the rest of us.
Yeah, definitely. And if only it wasn't easier to be more authentic. If only there weren't these invisible walls, I'm going in places I don't need to go. But anyhow, there's these invisible walls, all these other things that happen that seem to block us and prevent us sometimes from achieving what we want. Or we're just really happy. I talk to some people and they're like, I'm pretty damn happy. I don't think there's anything I would want to change. And it's like, all right, perfect.
Yeah, that's great.
That's great.
Yeah, and when you hear that, you're like, I hope that's true, because our capacity to fool ourselves is almost boundless and endless, as far as I can tell. I know I can certainly fool myself pretty easily. That's why I really value outside perspectives, because that helps double check things. But and the reason we kind of chose a broad topic for the show is so we can just talk endlessly about it, because there's kind of endless things that go into living an authentic life that's true to yourself. Continuously.
Definitely.
You're going to live for a long time, statistically speaking, and there's going to be a lot of different seasons in your life as well, and a lot of different things that'll come up in different situations. I mean, maybe those people who are like, I wouldn't change anything, I'm really happy and contented right now. And maybe that's true. And maybe a year from now, life has a way of manufacturing circumstances where that may not be the case anymore. You just never know.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of broad topics, I was at a strip club. Hold it. No, that's different broad. Sorry. We are going to jump into another broad topic, though, and that is kind of anxiety, because anxiety is, if you're just going to talk about anxiety by itself, that is a pretty broad topic. And I think we'll chunk it down and get a little bit more granular later on, but we wanted to start out just kind of generic. And I already got rid of my show notes for the description that we were talking about, but essentially it's kind of like where we're at. Here we are. Are we in September already? We're almost in October, for crying out loud. I went for my walk this morning, and there was already somebody who's posted a ghost on their garage door. Another house had pumpkins out. So people are ready for fall weather, it looks like. But it's been it's been over a year and a half now that we've been dealing with this thing that started back in 2020. And it has affected a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And I think anxiety is kind of one of those broad terms that we can kind of attach to
Mhm.
um, some of the emotions that people have been feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And what could be more authentic than, being anxious in the almost 2 years that we'll just call 2020, because,
Right,
it is 2021 right now. It'll be
right,
2022 soon, but you know, gosh darn it, if it doesn't still just feel like one long 2020 for,
right,
the foreseeable future.
right. And
And,
unfortunately,
being
because of
anxious within that,
right, because
I
of
don't know.
algorithms and different things, if we use certain terminology, we can get flagged
Mm,
for saying bad words. So
mm,
we don't want to be punished or shamed for using bad words. So we'll just call it 2020.
mm.
The situation that is 2020.
Yeah. And I would, when it comes to anxiety, I kind of, as you said, it's a very broad term. It
Mm-hmm.
encompasses a lot of things, but one of the biggest dividers that we can use that is kind of relevant to 2020 is saying, there's situational anxiety, and then there's kind of more systemic, pattern
Mm-hmm.
based, generalized kind of anxiety within people. And some people are running both, and some
Right.
people are maybe just anxious because of the pandemic and its ramifications. Oh, shit. Is that the bad word? I don't know. I think. All right, we're in jail. It's cool. I guess we'll just have to do our best from behind the bars now.
Shame. Shame. I don't know if did you see the game? Did you watch Game of Thrones?
I love Game of Thrones. It's probably the greatest show ever
That
made.
the
Yes, and the
scene
the
with
shame
Cersei
woman. Yeah.
where she's walking through the streets, and I was just, and the fact that it was a body double, but that she conveyed so much during that scene. I mean, even now
Hmm.
I'm just getting goosebumps talking about it. I was blown away by that scene. It was very emotionally moving for me.
Hmm.
But yeah, I just remember shame, shame. But we don't need to go there. We don't need to add
Yeah.
shame to anxiety, because that's like getting a booster shot these days. It just add a little shame will just add to the
Yeah.
anxiety sometimes.
Well, they're probably highly correlated, I would say, at
Yeah,
the root, net of what we call anxious experience inside of people probably arises from some emotion like that, like
right,
shame or guilt, or disconnection, some sort of something like that. Even if it's about something completely unrelated, it probably nets back to shame or
right,
something very similar,
right. Yeah.
oddly
Um,
enough.
And before we get too far into that, potentially, you also made a good comment about the fact that if it is kind of ongoing systemic anxiety versus situational. So
Mhm.
maybe we should kind of touch on that a little bit for people that aren't familiar, that, oh, maybe they're not aware that there is a difference, or they kind of understand that there is a difference, but they're not sure what that is. If you were to
Mhm.
kind of define or classify, how would somebody know if they had systemic versus just situational?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know. I'm
I
not a
mean,
doctor,
yeah, I
not
think,
a don't play one on TV, but I would
right.
say if you're feeling all right and then the pandemic came along and now you're not feeling all right, that'd be a good indicator
You
of
used
one
that word
thing.
again. 2020 came around. Yeah, it's kind of like crossing the
Well, now I
bridge,
feel the shame.
right?
Yeah.
It's kind of
Yeah.
like crossing the bridge. You're down in San
Mhm.
Francisco. If you have a fear of heights, then you have an appointment, or you want to go see somebody, and you have to cross a bridge, and maybe that triggers that fear of heights. That would be kind of a situational kind of example, if you will, where you might have some anxiousness or feel anxiety coming up to the bridge versus
Mhm.
like kind of waking up and just feeling anxious because.
Yeah, I guess the orientation is different. It's like if you have systemic anxiety, you probably already know just because you're already just would describe yourself as an anxious person. But
Right.
the difference would be situational. Oh man, I have this presentation coming up at work, and I'm feeling a little anxious and a
Hmm.
little nervous before it, that's that makes sense, and that
Right.
actually will probably, the is boosting your mental capacity to perform in a certain way,
Hmm.
and might even be helpful unless if it's not too crippling.
Right.
If it runs the other way, you just come out of wherever we go when we sleep, and you come back into life, and you just feel anxious in your body, and then your mind finds a reason to rationalize why you're doing it.
Right.
That would be a different kind of orientation.
Right. And it's it, and because I haven't studied anxiety a lot, I fortunately I feel like I've been one of those people who has not suffered from anxiety. I grew up in a
Oh,
household where everything was allowed to just work out, if you will. So it was, my dad used to, I think I've told you the story of going to the swap meet and with my dad as a little kid, and I'd go look at something because he was looking at something, and then I'd turn around to find out where he's at, and he's gone. And so I would spend the next 5-10 minutes wandering around, scared, um,
mm,
trying to, what's going on. And I would always end up finding him. Funny story, well, sad and funny. But a couple months ago, I'm talking to my dad and my stepmom, and my stepmom's been blind for, I don't know, 20, gosh, she's got to be over 20 years now. It's been a long time. And they do the shopping. And my stepmom is a stickler for sales. If it's not on sale, she wants to buy something and it's on sale, then she wants to make sure she's getting the sale price. So when they go grocery shopping, my dad pulls the front of the cart along and she holds the back. And so that's her
mm,
cane. So instead of walking around with her
okay.
cane, she holds the back of the cart and he pulls it along, and that's how he guides her. And she's got her cane inside the cart. Well, this one day, she's got coffee in one hand and she's holding on to the cart with the other hand. They stop and she's asking, "Hey, is there a sale? Is it truly on sale?" Because I guess the sign wasn't clear. She's like, "Well, go find out." Well, she's drinking her coffee. She gets an itch, so she takes her hand off the thing, scratches her itch, goes put her hand down. Shopping cart's gone.
Oh, wow.
She doesn't have a cane. She's just standing. She doesn't wear dark glasses. So she's
Hmm.
just standing there with her coffee. And apparently, like 10 or 15 minutes come by, and this woman finally walks up to her and goes, "Your husband is looking for you. He's lost you, and he's looking for you." My dad did the rest of the shopping, went to the went to the checkout, and checked out, and realized at that moment he's all, "I lost my wife. Where'd she
Huh.
go?" So this is kind of the household I grew up in, and
Okay.
things always worked out.
Hmm.
So because of that, I've always been okay with letting things work out, even when it feels like, oh, this could be bad. And so there is some anxiety that comes with that, and there's all the different feelings that come with that. Um, but there's also a knowing that things have always worked out. So I typically don't stress or get anxious about things because I'm still alive, coming up on
Yep.
50 here, and I'm still alive. So I've been fortunate in that way. There's a lot of other things I'm like, oh gosh, I wish the programming could be a little different. Um,
Mm.
so I have no idea where I was going with this. But anxiety to me, while I have felt anxious about different things, it typically has not been a part of my life in a major way. So this is kind of a new thing for me. But isn't anxiety is worrying about the future, right? It's concerns about the future. Or
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of different ways it can splice out, but the future's always involved in
okay.
some capacity for sure. Because
Hmm.
you're thinking about the future and you're hoping it'll be a certain way, or you're hoping something won't happen and your mind's making pictures that might be making you feel a certain way. Or, as you
Right.
said, there's a different way it can happen too. We tend to think of anxiety as all mental,
Hmm.
and it's actually not. If you come from an upbringing or a household or like a you say like big trauma experiences in your life, those actually can get stored in the body
Mhm.
in their own way, and anxiety can just come as they in kind of in the trauma work they call it from the bottom up, from the body up. So you might just be feeling incredibly anxious and panicking, and your mind will just rationalize it. Oh, I'm feeling this way because of this thing, even
Mhm.
though it may not be that way. It's feeling that way because it's almost like a trauma PTSD kind of response that lives inside of the nervous system.
So is that almost like the tail wagging the dog type of a deal, where it's overriding the brain and the ability, not necessarily the ability, but maybe it diminishes the ability of the mind to have control or take control of the situation? When you talk about that bottom
Well, I
up.
think I would say it's the mind just doing what it does, which is try to. I mean, we are rationalizing, meaning making machines. We can't.
Right.
It's almost like we can bear anything except not understanding how the world works or what's going on. So
Mm-hmm.
if the body's sending signals of panic and the body doesn't use verbal language, it just communicates in a different way. So if that's
Right.
just what's happening, there's a term called confabulation, which I think you know the ramifications of are endless and kind of really interesting. But confabulation is when we have a feeling, like if a feeling might just arise from a dimension in our mind, like the more mammalian kind of feeling centers of our brain
Mm-hmm.
or from our body, and then our mind fills in the reason for that feeling.
Mm.
That's what confabulation is. And
Okay.
the reason is just us trying to figure it out. It
All right.
probably isn't accurate at
I,
all, although
yeah.
maybe it could be.
I
Yeah.
was going to say there's probably a big disconnect there, because typically the emotions that the body is generating come from the subconscious mind, and that's what's generating the feelings. And versus when we're trying to make logical sense of a feeling, it's
Mhm.
operating from a completely different database that's not connected to the unconscious, subconscious mind. And therefore the meanings become very disjointed a lot of times, not always, because if you know why you're
Mhm.
having that feeling, like visiting the in-laws is a potential example during the holidays, or even just visiting family
Yeah,
during the holidays is kind
totally.
of a popular
Sure.
topic for people feeling anxious. They kind of know, because they also know what's going to happen, and they know what the end
Yeah.
result is, and it's like, I don't want to deal with this.
That's a
um
great example. Very common, very relatable. And that
yeah.
is right. And if you're doing that and you think about it now and it makes you feel kind of weird, that's the joys of anxiety, right? You're
Right.
living in the future right now. It's not
Right.
actually happening in the moment, but when
But
you
it
think
is in the
about it and
mind.
all your worries and considerations or bad stuff comes up in your head,
Right.
then you become anxious about it.
Right. And then I think so those that's kind of a known quantity. And then the fun one, and I've had this talk with a number of different people with just different situations, friends and family, is kind of the unknown. It's like, oh, well, I've got something coming up, as an example. And because our brain is all geared towards survivability, typically it goes to the worst case scenario. So you talked about doing a
Mm-hmm.
presentation as an example. Maybe it's a new job, and you're not the super confident presenter. You feel comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a new job. Maybe it's a really important. You could get another promotion out of this new job, or who knows, whatever. We tend to, as humans, worst case scenario.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh, what if the machine breaks down? What if I lose my concentration? What if what if all these bad things happen? It's never, what if the
Mm-hmm.
presentation goes really well? What if, everybody starts clapping at the end? What if the
Mm-hmm.
boss just goes, golly, Ryan, I got a couple of questions for you. We never do that, right? We always go towards the
Yeah.
negative. And I would say, I don't know what the percentage is. I'm going to say it's a really high percentage. Typically, when we go through and we do the event, whatever it is that we're feeling a little anxious about, it's like, oh, that really wasn't that bad. It's
Oh
like,
yeah,
oh,
we
okay.
it's not always true, but it's
Yeah.
almost always true
Right.
that the the reality is so much better than how
Yeah.
we feel in our heads leading up to things that we worry about. That is almost universally true.
Right.
And you're right. I mean, you point out a lot on this show. I forget the quote from our teacher Carl Buchheit. They say, I think it's you can't survive happiness, which is a
Right.
it's a very deep statement. And even though it sounds kind of dumb, just
Right.
off the top of my head, I'm like, what does that even mean? Well, it means our critter brain, the dimension of our mind that does fight, flight, or freeze, and keeps us alive and keeps our heart beating, it only values surviving things. It doesn't value joy or happiness or fulfillment. I mean, it's not opposed to them, but it just doesn't sort for it. It just doesn't matter. So when you talk about the fact that we always think about worst case scenarios and we don't think about how things can go well, it's because like we're wired to do that. We're
Right.
wired to like to worry about things that could mess with our survival. And in this case, I guess loss of belonging, which net it goes down to survival.
Right.
If
Right.
this presentation goes horribly, I'll get fired, and if I get fired, I don't have money. If I don't have money, I can't live my life, and blah blah
Right.
blah. All those
Right.
things will change.
And the embarrassment and shame and all the other things
Mm-hmm.
that can come with that. So then the big question is, or maybe not a big question, but I think the one thing people forget is that they actually have choice in all of this. And so, yes, you can
Mm-hmm.
go down the rabbit hole, and because the brain is naturally wired to go down the rabbit hole of all the ways things are going to go bad. And let's
Mm-hmm.
be honest, sometimes they do. Sometimes people get on a plane and they feel a little anxious and it does crash. Um, but logically, we can
Mm-hmm.
stop that and go, but I have choice in the matter, right? Am I going to worry about the 0.1%, or I don't know what the statistics are, because the other
It's
thing,
incredibly safe, but yeah.
right? But it's never talked
Yeah.
about. It's the other kind of one of my big aha moments with that Carl said was that you never hear about the 7,362 planes that landed safely today. That will
Yeah.
never be a news topic,
Yeah.
simply because we don't care about that. Our brain, again, we can't survive happiness. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's why we don't find that interesting. Death and
Yeah.
destruction, yeah, sign me up. I'm curious
Yeah.
about what's going on there. But we do have choice as individuals, as humans. And while it can be whatever level of difficult for people, I think at times to stop the rabbit hole, going down the rabbit hole, is you get to have a choice and go, okay, where is it that I want to focus my attention on? Do I
Mm-hmm.
want to focus it on all the negative ways things can go bad? Or do I choose, because I have choice, do I want to choose to actually focus on something that's painful or
Yeah.
happy?
I mean, it's a great point, and sometimes that can help. It can be a lot more complex than that, though. I think that's
Sure.
what's really tricky about anxiety. And there's
Yeah.
it's because of this point we touched on a little bit. I just want to say a little bit more to
Hmm.
confuse everyone and make this even harder to talk about, maybe. But it's a really interesting distinction. Because just for me, you talk a bit about your background. I came from more of an erratic and unpredictable environment,
Mm.
emotionally unpredictable. So
Hmm.
I actually have been diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder. So
Mm.
I got almost a lifetime of experience with this stuff, and
All
it can be
right.
incredibly debilitating and really
Yeah.
hard. And it's almost, for me, anxiety is almost like the water I swim in. So I'm like, it's
Mm.
just how you do life to a certain point. It's just a different orientation. But
Right.
my mind does a thing where it's like you're anxious first, and then you just fill in an idea or a thing or a reason, or you grab for it. It's like, oh, I'm anxious because of what's inflation going to do today? You know what I mean? But you're not actually, but like maybe that's the solution your mind grabs at today or
Right.
something. But the thing I want to point out, because this is maybe it's not that new, but kind of as the conversation and the understanding around anxiety evolved a bit, this distinction becomes really important of whether it's brain based or body based. Like where is it generated from? Um, in like the way it runs in your body, because we can have it top down. That would be, mentally we have a thought or we have a trigger or an outside stimulus triggered us, and then we have anxiety that kicks off something, and then we can have bottom up, like I said, this trauma, PTSD response, old experiences that are like literally stored in the body, stored in the nervous system. I don't even know how they kind of operate like ghosts, like you're almost haunted by something from beyond. But the vagus nerve within our nervous system is it's unique in that it's a two-way communication path. Not all nerves actually work that way. A lot of the time you might just stimulus comes from the mind and it goes one way. But the vagus nerve, actually, the body can communicate up to the brain and the brain can communicate down to the body. So that's why, and you may not know, and it's hard to tell, but starting to put some awareness on, am I feeling anxious because of a reason I'm aware of, or do I have no idea why I'm feeling this way? It will give you a better idea if it's this kind of top down or bottom up thing, because the way you deal with it is different. This is why that's what kicked up in my head. Your example is really useful for if you truly have a cognitive based, like trigger based form of anxiety that you can reality test a bit, you can choose again about, and that might help. But if you think that's what's happening and it's not, if you're truly like your body's sending signals of panic, and then your mind's being like, oh, I'm feeling panicked or anxious because of this, and then you try to mess with and feel like, well, is that true? And, am I hearing it? And it doesn't work. That's because the generative nature of the experience might not be coming from your mind.
Right.
And
So
that's why this can be complicated.
Yeah, you're working in the wrong part if you're trying to deal with it up here, but it's actually being generated here. So big question is then, as you've been dealing with this, I'm assuming you've learned some different ways of coping, of identifying. So do you have ways of identifying if it's coming from here, if it's, top down, or if it's bottom up? And then two, what do you do? I mean, how do you try to interrupt? I always go back to the dog analogies, and only in the sense that it's kind of, how do you communicate with an animal that you don't speak their language? And I feel like talking to the body sometimes, dealing with our own selves, is like speaking to another animal or trying to communicate with another animal that we just don't know how to speak to. And with a dog, as an example, as soon as they see something, if you snap your fingers or you shout their name or something like that, it causes an interrupt pattern, is what I've learned. You have to catch it really early, though, because if they see a bunny rabbit and you don't see them before they see the bunny rabbit and then move, because once that first twitch, they move, they're gone. Doesn't matter what you do or say, they're gone. But if I can catch them before the first muscle twitch, it's like the shock to their system. Like, I know what happened there. Oh crap. And then they forget about the bunny rabbit for whatever reason. But you got to kind of create that disconnect. So are there ways, or have you learned some ways, or, what have you learned over the years that seems to help you?
I've learned all kinds of stuff, and I have to be completely honest. I haven't really found much that works great all the time. I wish I could be like, I got this thing and it's great. Right. And I don't. If you have Netflix, there's a series on Netflix called Explained, and they did
Mm-hmm.
a whole special thing explained about anxiety. I
Mm,
haven't watched it in a couple of years. Maybe I probably should watch it again if we're going to be talking about this more and more, which we are
right.
planning to do. Because like I said, what's more 2020 than being anxious? So let's see if we can all help some
That's
people out and help ourselves out.
it's got to be a
But
shirt. It's a shirt or a bumper sticker or something somewhere.
yeah, but there's a really, if you're not familiar with this guy, his name's Robert Sapolsky. He's a very famous biologist, and he's great, and I really respect his contribution to the field, and I respect whatever he has to say
Mm,
generally because he's very smart and very insightful. And I'm not gonna be able to fully do it justice. Like if you can watch it, just try and find the moment. But they asked him the same question, and he just with this, he looks so defeated and so exasperated. And he's like, "Look, our tools for working with this right now are so woefully inadequate."
mm,
And I have to be honest, I'm not that defeated about it, but this is complicated. We are dealing with the parts of our mind that are tasked with keeping us alive, and it's
right.
all it cares about. And it is closest to the nervous system, and it has primacy over everything if it wants to sound that alarm or take that authority. If we,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't operate with authority, but we'll just kind of explain it that way. It's like if this gets kicked up, man, it gets to override almost everything.
All right.
But there's a lot you can do. The distinction between body-based and brain-based, like somatic anxiety and cognitive anxiety, is a relatively new one for me, and it's very profound. So I'm excited to keep exploring the ramifications of that. But knowing that distinction, it's like how that's a tough one. How will you
Mm,
know if it's one or the other? Because, like I said, our capacities to trick ourselves is we're really good at that,
all right.
and we fool ourselves into thinking like, yeah, everyone else doesn't know, but I know what's going on with me. It's like
All right.
probably not, man. But sometimes I don't want to gaslight
Sure.
everyone into
Yeah,
thinking
but
that
if
they don't
you're
understand themselves. That's not
yeah,
what I'm saying. I'm
all
saying
right. But
this
if
is
you've got a
tricky.
belief
That's
filter,
kind of hmm
right, if you got one of those
yeah,
invisible beliefs
exactly.
going on, and that's
hmm
part of that being able to exist in the world is dependent on this belief to be embedded in your identity for survival. It's going
hmm
to be kind of hard to not not be aware of what's really going on.
Yeah. And I think part of this is being human a big deal. Are you familiar with the Enneagram at all?
Mm-mm.
It's I'm not super familiar with it, but some friends who are obsessed with it kind of held me down and make me take the test. It's more than a personality test, but the gist of it, is like it's like the Myers-Briggs.
Mm-hmm.
It's a personality kind of sorter. And they have numbers, and I'm a 6. And I bring this up because I'm like, this is how prevalent this is in people's lives. Sixes, I think there's 9 categories, I believe. Sixes, like the theme, the whole explanation of sixes is just you're hyper vigilant and anxious, and that's your whole orientation to life.
Mm-hmm.
So that I would think is probably more of a somatic based thing where if you're just constantly sorting for what's dangerous or what's potentially threatening,
Mm-hmm.
um, that's different than I have a presentation next week or I have a paper
Right.
due or
Right.
I'm pregnant and I've never been pregnant. That's scary. My wife's pregnant. I'm going to be a father. That's scary. Whatever
Right.
it is, there's situations that can come up that would kick that up in a very different way,
Yeah.
even though the experience might be similar after the original impetus has moved you into it.
Right. Right. And while it's scary, the thought of having kids is scary for many people who have not had them. Because I was in that group. They're actually quite wonderful. or at least they can be. I mean, there's times, but for the most part, for those that may be in that situation, they're actually pretty wonderful, especially when they move out.
Hmm.
They grow up and they move out and responsible for their own bills and stuff. It's great. Have a kid. Feel free.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then you've done your job well if they can move out and function fully and individuate to that capacity.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. I faked it as the best I could. So,
Hmm.
just like everybody
That,
else, I learned
that's
from
what
my
I hear
parents.
from parents. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, come on, if you're going to be anxious about something, be anxious about having a kid, because the potential of being able to totally fuck up that child's life is quite real. And yet the reality is most parents don't. I mean,
Mhm.
most parents that care, they don't. And it's interesting because I always find it going through the NLP training that we've gone through, and there's all this realization of childhood trauma and all the childhood experiences. And typically, in my experience, it's always the women that are raising their hands that are going, so I had this situation when my daughter was 3. Did I just totally mess them up? And they're always curious about this one. They're like, oh my gosh, I did this one thing to my child, one of many. I can think of a couple things that I did to my daughter, that I'm like, probably not the best solution, but it was the best solution in the moment. Um, and then ultimately, the response from the trainers are, don't have that conversation with your kids, because now you've opened up a door and they're going to tell you all the things that you did that you're not even aware of. Because the kids aren't aware of the things that you think you screwed up, right? They're worried about the things that left an imprint on them where they know you screwed up. And it's interesting. And because I've kind of had some of those conversations with my daughter, and it's interesting her perspective on her growing up and what that was versus my perspective on what her life was growing up, and they're very different. So if
Yeah.
you're
Oh, that's fascinating. I
yeah
would imagine so.
yeah
And they
yeah so
say no two kids grow up in the same family, which is a
hmm
really, really, oh man, like a mind blowing statement the first time
right
I heard that. It's
yeah
like if you got, if there's 4 kids total in family, all 4 kids grew up in different
different
families.
hands
Like
yeah
how, which is
and that's
functionally
even with twins,
inaccurate, but their experience of the
right?
family. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Twins too.
Even with twins, it's kind of like the analogy, I forget who it was, used the analogy, you have twins and both twins wake up in the middle of the night and they start crying because they're hungry. And so mom, dad, whoever comes in, they've got the bottle, they got the boob, whichever way it is, and they pick up one and they start feeding them. And let's say they do one baby at a time. They grab the one baby, they start feeding the one baby, and that baby's like, "Where have you been? I've been crying now for hours, and what took you so long? Why don't you love me? Why are, all these statements?" And even though it's
Mhm.
only been a minute, but come on, babies don't track time like we do as adults. And meanwhile, I don't know if it takes 5 minutes to feed that baby. You put him down, you grab the second baby, bring him up, start feeding him, and that baby's like, "Oh my God, I cried, you came, thank you so much. Oh my God, food, I feel so much better. Thank you very much. I
Yeah.
appreciate it." And so that's kind of what you're talking about. Their experience is very different.
Mhm. Yeah, and their experiences are very different. And more to your point, it's natural and I've seen, we're talking about a lot of people are like having, when we're learning about childhood development theory and traumatic experiences and patterns that come online when you're young and kids, and people start like, oh my God, did
Right.
this thing happen once? Did I ruin my kid forever? And it's natural to a certain degree to have those sort of thoughts or
Yeah.
considerations, but it's
It shows
also
that you care at
it's
least.
exactly. but it's really inaccurate. I think that's usually why it's recommended against it, because you're just projecting from your map what you think might be a problem, and it may
Right.
actually not be, because this is a very, very, very important distinction what I'm about to say. It's not what happened that matters. It's what happened means that
Right.
matters.
Right.
And that, like, people can go through the same experience and come out completely different ways from it. Some
Right.
people go to war and they don't get PTSD and they're not traumatized from it, and it was a horrible experience, but they are
They're a better person
relatively
for it,
speaking, yeah, they
potentially.
could be a better
They could
person.
be a,
They could
yeah.
be relatively unscathed. They could be
Right.
okay. Just because it
Right.
happened doesn't mean we know that they're going to be debilitated
Right. Yeah. Gave
mentally
them
in
the
some
confidence that they
capacity.
needed in order to
Yeah.
be a better person, as an example. So it's the
Yeah.
meaning of the experience that matters, not the
Yeah,
actual
that's all that
experience.
matters when it comes
Yeah.
to how our personalities and egos are formed, and the beliefs and identities that we create about ourselves. It's the
Right.
meaning we make about stuff, not what actually happened.
Right. Right.
And that makes
Go
it
ahead.
more complicated, right? Because we can't just assume anything about anyone. You got to ask and you got to dig
Right.
around to see what matters and what doesn't.
Right. Yeah, and
But
it's crazy how much we generalize and we kind of push on the people. It's like, oh, you're this person, therefore you must think, act, believe this way.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a big 2020ism also that's been coming online for years though. It's definitely got more polarized over the years that, oh, you're more of a right-wing person, then you must feel and believe and do these things versus, oh, you're a left-wing person, you must feel, think, and do these things. It's like, well, hold it. No, because the
Mhm.
reality is, as far as I'm concerned, both parties are screwed up, and we need to find some commonality in the middle here that we can work with.
Mhm.
So while I may lean right on a lot of my viewpoints, um, I would not I would not classify myself as a Republican per se, because a lot of what
Mhm.
the right wing Republican are talking about, I'm like, no, I don't relate to that. And then same thing, far side on the left, I'm like, no, I don't relate to that. I was talking to a friend the other day. I'm like, we need a third party, the middle ground party, to kind of come
Mhm.
together and bring some balance to everything. So that'll get people
Y-
anxious right there. Let's just talk about politics. Talk about making people
Yeah, I was gonna
anxious. Oh
say,
my
let's.
goodness.
What's a better way to talk about anxiety than just installing some in everyone real quick,
Yeah.
so then you can work with it?
What's that?
Let's just bring
You're
up
gonna have a
politics so
kid?
everyone can be on edge a little bit, and then
Yeah.
okay, yeah, that's anxiety. Now you know
Right.
what it
Now you
is.
know what
Yeah.
we're talking about. Yeah. I
Yeah, I think I mean, politics is super fascinating, and it comes up on this show a lot, even though we've never actually done a show about politics, because
why
I
would
don't
you?
the more
I'm like,
I
oh,
think I personally think it's utterly fascinating. And I think I said at some point, I think there's a reason why all the famous psychologists at some point in their careers write books about politics. It's like
hmm,
Freud wrote about it. Everyone, because politics, like our political orientation and how we come together as a species or as a nation, and how do we live and coexist together in the most
hmm,
effective way possible, is it's all psychology at the end of the day.
right,
It's all our mentality and our mindset and our psychology and our human tribal orientation and hierarchical ways we net down ourselves and fit ourselves into groups. Like, it's just,
right,
there's so much to it that's so fascinating and
yeah,
horrifying for me.
and
So I,
horrifying. Yeah,
yeah.
I
So
tend to land on the
I can't
horrifying
think
side.
about the mind without thinking about politics, because it all just applies so easily, like
No wonder why
most
you're
of the time
anxious.
too.
No wonder why you're
Yeah,
anxious, Will.
you know what? Well, there's
I'm
your
going to
problem
incorporate
right there. Yeah.
politics into the human experience. Oh shit. Okay, I'd be anxious too. Damn.
Yeah. Well, as far as I can tell, I think politics makes people anxious to a certain degree. This isn't true
Oh
for
yeah.
everyone, of course, but it has a lot to do with control and being controlled, right? So I tend to notice people who
In what
don't
way?
like government and politics. Well,
I just
the
want to kind of
government is a
confine because that's kind of we're talking about
yeah.
politics, which is a big thing. So I just want to kind of
The
chunk it down
government
what you mean.
operates in a capacity where it has authority and control over your life,
Right.
right? And
Hmm.
if you don't like anyone to have authority or control over your life, probably because it didn't go well earlier on in your life, that's
Right.
usually how these things work. You don't like government, generally speaking,
Hmm.
or you don't in you can go smaller chunk too. You probably don't like your boss, and you probably don't like
Right.
anyone with authority. You don't like police, you don't like uh the the
Right.
person who's waiting to seat you at the restaurant. They have some control over your life and a thing
Right.
that you want. It does, like, there's different ways to apply this,
Hmm.
so it kicks up a lot of stuff for people, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I am curious because I feel like we've got off topic here a little bit, which I always enjoy doing
Yeah.
with you because we do it so well. Is
Yeah.
I don't know if we necessarily got an answer, and maybe there isn't a good answer for some ways of, identifying. It sounds like for you, it's kind of difficult to identify if it's top down, if is this kind of situational in the brain, anxiety that I'm
Hmm.
dealing with, or is it bottom up where it's actually in the nervous system? And you're saying there's two different ways of dealing with that. I mean, is there like, do you
Uh-huh.
have any, even if it's
Mm.
very general and vague, like, hey, if you're kind of feeling this way, check in and see if it is this potentially. And again, which I think is always the most beneficial. It's like, okay, well, great, I've identified it. What do I do now?
Yeah,
And I
totally. And
understand that it
the
sounds
way
like
you,
uh, there isn't a wonder tool out there that's just going to solve everything. But what are some things that people can practice or pay attention to try and you know
yeah.
knock it down a little bit or disrupt it, give a little squirrel like the dog, like, what, let me think about something, because I think about pain. I was the younger, I have an older sister, 5 year older sister, so growing up I was the grubby little boy that was always tugging and causing problems and those types of things. So when
Hmm.
people stub their toe or something or like, damn, that hurts, it's like, oh, you want that pain to go away, let me step on your other toe, because if I make the pain in your other toe greater than the pain that you feel in your first toe that you stubbed, I'm going to make that pain go away. You won't care
Hmm.
about that toe anymore because you're going to be more focused on this toe. And I kind
Yeah.
of think of that with anxiety. It's like almost like, can you just shift the focus? Although I don't want to create more anxiety to make the less
Hmm.
anxiety not noticeable.
Well, I appreciate that example. Because actually, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but there's actually something to it that's really important and really relevant, which is our capacity to just be with what's going on inside of ourselves. And it's tough. And if you're in a lot of pain, it's probably really annoying to hear, actually. But it's like the more you can just what I mean, in a lot of traditions, they call it like being the witness to yourself, right? So this is a
Mm-hmm.
bit of like a mindfulness thing. But if you're feeling anxious, it's usually that the pain of anxiety is usually the fact that we're resisting the fact that we are feeling anxious right now.
Mm-hmm.
And to drop the resistance inside ourselves to the experience is just to actually have the experience and let
Mm.
it flow through us.
All right.
And that actually can be truly transformational. It may not always be, and
Right.
um, it's not a magic bullet. It's not going to change things in 5 seconds for you. That's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of I think that's the main reason why people think this stuff doesn't work, is because they're kind of expecting miracles. And a lot of this is more of a process a lot of the time,
All right.
unfortunately. I mean, don't get me wrong. I always hope for miracles too, and I get disappointed. But then I realize, like, I know that that's not how this works generally.
Right.
So if you're
That's
feeling anxious, can you just sit there or lie there and just feel the anxiousness and just be with it and not even try to solve it? And but you
right.
can if you want to. Be like, why am I feeling this way? That's fine. But
Hmm.
maybe even just try being checking in with yourself. We say, oh, how am I feeling right now? Oh,
Right.
I'm feeling anxious and I'm feeling shitty and I'm feeling low energy. Usually it's a big cocktail of stuff. It's probably not just one thing.
Hmm.
And that's a really simple but very powerful exercise. That's good for a lot of things, not just anxiety, but naming
Right.
your emotions is very powerful. And again, it's like not in a magic bullet kind of way, but as a
Right.
practice. And when you're feeling really bad, if you can just lay down and be like, all right, I'm just for the next 10 minutes, even set your watch or something if you need to. I'm just going to feel what it feels like to
Right.
feel really bad right now. Because I know I'm not going to die. I
Hmm.
can survive it. I don't enjoy it, but like,
Right.
can I be witness to myself having this experience instead of have this experience like, oh, this is awful, and then mentally
Right.
resist it, push it away, like I need this
Right.
to be different, this I need to change this, like I don't want this anymore. What pill can I take? Can I have a drink? Can I call a friend? Can I watch Netflix? Whatever
Right.
the coping mechanism is, maybe if you can name your experience and just have it, that is a huge deal.
Right.
Um, and over time, that can be transformational. It's more of a management technique than a transformational
Hmm.
experience, but I think it's a true important human skill for a lot of things, not just anxiety, to be able to be with our lives as they're happening.
Right.
So that's one tool that I have found that's very useful. And I mean, even I know it, and a lot of time, like, fuck that. I'm like, I don't want to do that. You like,
Right.
that it's totally normal too. To be
Right.
like, well,
It's
I
kind of like
can't
going
believe
to
what
the
you just
gym, I
said.
think.
Will, that sounds stupid. Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
you
it
got to,
does.
it's kind of that muscle that you got to work. And sometimes when you go
Mhm.
to the gym, you're like, you're okay with going to the gym. It actually like, okay, let's go. I want to deal with this process of working out. And there's other times where like, I should go to the gym, but I don't feel like going to, and then we have that internal, conversation with ourselves. Do I really
Yeah,
want to go through this process now? And I think it's okay to make that decision in the moment, right? And
yeah,
allow yourself that there are times that while you should, whoever whoever put that whoever that authority figure is that says you should go to the gym, um,
hmm
sometimes you're not going to be able to do that, and that's okay. But I almost, is
and
it
it
kind of like,
changes over time.
yeah, I almost feel
Yep.
like maybe it would get a little bit easier. It's almost like dealing with grief, where some people resist grief, the death of a pet
hmm
or a loved one or whatever it might be, and they just resist it. So they hold it in, and all that energy is just stuck in their system. And then when they're finally, may their system just get full and they just finally pop the top and they got to just have that ugly cry, or they're finally in a place where they're like, you know what, I need to kind of deal with this. And they allow that to kind of flow through their body. I would imagine that by getting it out of the body, even in small increments, it would be helpful in some way as far as anxiety
Yeah,
goes. Because if it's living in the body, you may not get rid of it without something else, but if you can at least let it flow through and have that 5 minutes or 10 minutes to just allow that energy to move, I would imagine that is just going to help kind of calm the body down a little bit, so that it can move
yeah.
forward throughout the rest of the day a little
Abs-
bit easier.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you remind me of two things. One, I love the gym analogy. It's kind of a well-worn metaphor, but because it's super useful and accurate, that's
Mm-hmm.
why it's well-worn. But if you think about if you want to get healthier and lose weight, you're like, well, how do I do that? And you're like, okay, well, there's a lot of things, but the biggest two is exercise more and eat healthier, eliminate
Right.
bad things, and eat more fruits and vegetables and whole foods and stuff like that. And you're like, well, I don't like doing either of those things. What else you got, doc? What's
Yeah.
the pill? What's the thing? And
Right.
they're like, no, just go do those things. And
Right.
in the beginning, you have to force yourself to go to the gym, and you don't like it, and blah 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 blah. But if you get over a certain hump, after a couple months or maybe more, maybe less,
Right.
your identity shifts a bit, and maybe even over time, you start to learn that, actually, I'm looking forward to go to the gym
Hmm.
today. I'm looking forward to this salad today,
Right.
instead of that, double fried, you know, burger with the donut bun or whatever you were gonna
Ooh,
eat instead.
the pretzel bun. Oh, those
The press-
pretzel bun burgers. Oh, they're so
oh, those are
good.
good. Those are good. Yeah. I was trying to think of the most ridiculous example I could, where it's like
Ben
you,
and Jerry's
you
for
can go,
dinner.
yeah, where you go get the hamburger that has like donuts for buns
Right.
instead, and like just the
Right.
most
Yeah. What is it?
insane things you look at.
There's a burger chain. I think it's in Vegas or somewhere, and they have the single bypass, double bypass, and they actually
I've
have
heard of
girls
that. Yeah. Oh,
in
that's
nurses
so
outfits.
dark. Yeah.
Yeah, that actually,
That's
they go. You have girls in nursing outfits, and they've got the
yeah.
stethoscope and everything, and then you buy, and it's all like, so yeah,
I've
they're
heard of
they're
that.
they're
That's so
playing it up a
dark.
little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah.
The menu is like designed to kill you because it's
Yeah.
so unhealthy and rich and just
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But people love
Yeah.
it. Some people, America.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like what could be more a better representation of America and late stage capitalism than the burger joint in Vegas that talks about how it's killing you and you
Right.
love it,
Yes. Yes. Give me more. Give me more.
But yeah, and oh no, I've gone cross that. I forget what we were talking about, but you know, I shouldn't have poo-pooed the stuff you can do anxiety earlier, because sometimes I get frustrated with my own experience, which is a
Sure.
very human thing to do, but not a very productive thing to do, right? Because
Right.
if you can ferret out the way you're gonna, how should I put it? The way we can treat this or work with it and manage it is usually the same both ways. But if you can find the distinction of whether it's somatic anxiety or cognitive anxiety,
Hmm.
it just is more like, if you know it's cognitive and it's in your mind, there's a lot of tools that will be more effective for
Right.
that. But if it's more just if you just have this kind of, your body sends these signals of panic, and then your mind is like, oh God, we're feeling panic. Why? And then it comes up with a reason, and it may have nothing to do with why that's happening.
Right.
Because as we talked about, it's like when you have these experiences, if you in life and you don't deal with them, if you don't feel your feelings, like,
Hmm.
and I don't want this to sound grim, but it's accurate. I'm not trying to like scare people. It's like, this stuff doesn't take care of itself naturally. Our bodies
Mm.
operate in systems, like as a system. And
Right.
if you have a lot of trauma from earlier in life and in childhood, if you have a lot of stress that you don't deal with, that you just kind of push away or ignore, or
Just live over.
soothe it with some sort of addiction, like
Right.
work, sex, drugs, money, gambling, whatever it is. I don't know. You could be addicted to reading books if they help you resist your life. It could be
Sure.
anything, literally.
Yeah.
If you don't deal with this stuff, it doesn't just disappear. It might feel like it did in the moment, but it's stored in your body. Like,
Right.
we have a balance sheet for this stuff, and your body will always reconcile the balance sheet in one way or another. It's just how we work. I like
Hmm.
the kind of the big heavy hitter guy in the trauma world right now, Bessel van der Kolk. His book is called "The Body Keeps the Score," and I think that's
Mm,
one of the coolest and profound ways to put it. It's like your body holds on to this stuff and it pushes it in different areas and holds it in different ways, but it doesn't disappear into the ether until
right,
you deal with it. And
right,
that's why outside help is so important. And that's why also having a personal practice of healing and processing is important too.
right.
Because this stuff, it doesn't just resolve itself naturally a lot of the time. Sometimes it does, but the big stuff, no, like that sticks around.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
this is highly important.
yeah, yeah. So very
And
much
a
so.
lot of the time, as a generalized statement, I'll just say if you find you have a lot of anxiety in your body, you may think it's because of the 2020. Got it. Got it.
I was, I was
Caught
almost
myself
gonna, I
there.
was almost gonna beep you there.
Well, it wouldn't have mattered because if we ever get one of the beeps where it's supposed to be, that's just upsetting. We can only have mistimed beeps on
Mistime
this
beeps,
show, but
yes.
the triggers for our anxiety are usually from long ago and far away. We
Right,
have anxiety now, but it's like it kicks up our old stuff. And if you can work with the old stuff, it'll get better now,
right,
right? It can knock the wattage down on anxiety about 2020, about about being sick, about other people being sick, about
right.
politics, about the
About
economy,
yeah,
whatever's
anything
stressing
in
you out
life.
right now.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's the good story, and if I forget who it was talking about um the wife who was complaining to her husband, holidays are coming up, we're gonna have to go visit my family. And mom, oh my God, mom, I'm gonna have to deal with mom and just not looking forward to it. Worked with NLP Marin practitioner and was like, okay, dun, 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 did their thing, went to the holiday party. And as they're driving home, the wife turns to the husband and she's all, what was up with mom this year? She was like, she wasn't poking me. She wasn't trying to be antagonistic. She wasn't, she wasn't doing all of these things. And the husband looks at her and he's like, what are you talking about? She was the same exact woman. I just kept waiting for you to blow up and you never responded. And she's all,
Huh.
really? And
Oh,
he goes, yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
because because she was looking through a different lens now of mom, had a different perspective. Instead of taking those attacks head on, putting the armor up, and then having the, defend herself, it was kind of like, every time mom sent a jab out, she just didn't even notice that it was there. She turned out of the way and let it go. But her experience was uniquely different because she had
Mhm.
a new perspective on just everything related to mom, and therefore she didn't even know that there was a change on her end. She thought her mother had changed. And so that's kind of what you're talking about, is that when you actually go to the core source of when
Mhm.
as a younger version of yourself, when you learn that this is the way the world is, this is the way you are, this is the way it is, and then you're able to change that perspective because it's not serving you in a positive way anymore these days. It's not, while the system, your body, thinks that it's serving you in a positive way, you cognitively know that it's not. Change the view, change the interpretation, change the meaning of that experience for that little
Mhm.
one, and then it doesn't get, using a generic word, it doesn't get triggered anymore. And if you don't get triggered, then there isn't the anxiety, there isn't the frustration, there isn't being mad, there isn't all these things that we don't want anymore. They all just melt away
Mhm.
because the awareness trigger, if you will, has been removed. The system is no longer looking for this. It's no longer
Mhm.
looking for this. That makes you mad, makes you anxious, makes you whatever. If you remove whatever that is, then you can go on your
Yeah.
life without being affected in the
Yeah.
same ways that you have been.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's
Yeah.
like, as a huge overarching statement, it's like, well, what can you do? It's funny, I say this on the show a lot because I don't almost ever say this to clients because we do other things, but it's like
Right.
a true mindful practice is very useful in all kinds of ways. So, and picking up some books around, I mean, Nish That Hand, I think, is a guy I've learned a lot about. Just, very cool guy, talking to a teacher about mindfulness and just kind
Hmm.
of noticing for your reality inside your body, what's going on right now. So that's like, as a general term, picking up some sort of mindfulness practice is really
Right.
good for anxiety. And then in a more specific way, in our training, what you kind of touched on, Ryan, you reminded me of a client I had a few years ago now. She had a lot of anxiety because she wanted to transition from being an employee to an entrepreneur. Her dream was to have her own business.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like wrought with anxiety. It was just like, it was almost kind of debilitating.
Mm.
And you would think on the surface that this anxiety is just about the functionality of a big change in your life, right?
Right.
And of course, that
Well,
was
and
a big part
security
of it.
and all those types of things. Sure.
Yeah, money and security, blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah. Being an entrepreneur is completely different than being an employee, especially from a financial sense and
Right.
all kinds of other ways. But when we dig into the way, you and I know how to, people's minds, the way we generate our experience comes through our senses, our sensory input, and that's the language of the body and the language of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Pictures, sounds, feelings, smells, and tastes. Her mind kept generating, and whenever she'd think about what she wanted or whenever she'd take action, she'd come up against this picture of her father, who's like, was very intense way of like teaching, like when she was a child.
Mm-hmm.
She was just very intense about school and academics and like pushed her to succeed and thrive. And that brings up all kinds of anxiety and pressure and bad feelings and
Right.
um, relational attachment trauma issues, kind of things that come up.
Mm-hmm.
So every time she thought what she wants as, a fully functioning adult woman with a husband and kids and a life for, 4 decades, her mind's operating like she's a 6-year-old with her
Mm-hmm.
dad yelling at her to like do better academically.
Right.
And that's what really causes the anxiety. And if you can go back to these places and these dimensions of mind and people and work with them and revise the meaning, revise the experience of things
Right.
these traumatic things that we learn to survive, so our brains are keeping them alive for us, then it's much easier now. They just knock the wattage down on the
Mm-hmm.
anxiety to where it's almost appropriate. Well, if you want to make a big transition from being an employee to an entrepreneur, it's probably appropriate that you have
Right.
some, not I don't want to say anxiety, but it's
Right.
appropriate that
Should feel a little
you're
anxious.
engaged. It should feel kind of weird and
Yeah.
different and maybe be
Yeah.
on edge in a little bit of a kind of a way. And as you talk
Mm-hmm.
about, there's stress, and then there's another term, eustress, which is just the other side of a coin. It's useful stress. It's just,
Right.
it's generative and useful and gets us to do things, and it's actually a healthy form of stress. Like, you probably want that if you're making a
Mm-hmm.
huge life change,
Right.
but you also don't want to have the huge wattage of your father yelling at you,
Right.
35 years ago when you're a kid on top of it. That makes it so much more worse.
Right.
And you're not actually dealing with your reality right now. You're dealing with reality back then, and it's messing up what you're trying to do right now.
Right.
So
Right.
that's always in the mix too.
Yeah.
Where is our traumatic patterning stored, either in our minds or in our bodies or in our kind of unconscious, and how much of that is causing our experience right now, and can you change that? And then whatever isn't that, can you be with it? Can you breathe through it? Can you not resist it? Can you just know that part of the experience of being human is not feeling good sometimes. And
Right.
can you just actually have this life skill called being with hard feelings, because they
Mm-hmm.
won't last. So
Right.
that's why it works. If you can be with it, it will not stay forever.
Right. It will
At some
pass.
point that will change. Yeah.
Right.
That's why it's such an important skill.
Right. Yeah. Nicely said. Nicely said. All righty, sir. Well, I
So
think with that, probably at the end of the show, unless you had a so in there
yeah.
somewhere.
Well, I think as I said, I don't know what else to say, but I feel like I have a lot more to say. So
All right.
we'll keep talking about this one. Anxiety's a big part of being
All
human,
right.
kind of always has been, but especially right now, you and I kind of, when we were planning the show, we're like, I think we really need to dig into this one
Yeah.
because 2020's really kicked us up and presenced it for a lot of people. So,
Right. Yeah.
and then we're like, well, what do we say? We're like, well, I don't know. There's like a million things to say about anxiety. There's so many angles, so many little things about it. So
Right. Yep.
we'll
And I
keep
would
digging and hopefully
keep
it'll
on
get
digging.
better.
Yeah, and for the viewers out there, for those that are still watching, we're always open to comments, suggestions, thoughts, ideas. What's going on in your life that's making you feel a little anxious? That maybe you would like to have more feedback or thoughts on that we can share with you. We'd love to hear what those are.
We would always love to hear that.
Always love to hear
And
that.
we
All right.
also want to hear the people's thought. I mean, should Ryan grow back the mohawk? Like, I don't know. Who's on my side about it? I need to like start the revolution here.
There we go. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. All righty, sir. Well, until next Tuesday, 10:15 in the morning. Hope you all have a great week, and we will chat with you then.
All right. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, everyone. Go
All right.
forth and name your feelings until then.
There